Seattle General smells like bleach and recycled air. The fluorescent lights buzz at 0200 hours when most people sleep, but Ashley Cooper checks vitals with mechanical precision. She's been here 8 months, working ICU nights, charting with the same neat handwriting she used to document field casualties in forward operating bases. No one at Seattle General knows that handwriting came from a trauma surgeon's tent in Kandahar. They see a quiet nurse in blue scrubs, moving between beds like she's made of habit and routine. What they don't see is the 3-inch scar along her right forearm, covered by her long sleeves even in summer, the kind of wound that comes from dragging a bleeding teammate through razor wire while rounds snapped overhead. She doesn't advertise capabilities. She doesn't demand recognition. She arrives, works, leaves. 8 months of perfect charting, perfect timing, perfect restraint. And Dr. Mercer has decided that this restraint means weakness. He sits in his white coat like it's a throne, and what he sees when he looks at Ashley Cooper is a nurse who knows her place. Diploma mill training. Field experience mistaken for competence. The kind of person who should be grateful for the job and terrified of the evaluation. What he doesn't see is legend. He doesn't see the call sign whispered in forward operating bases from Kandahar to Kabul. He doesn't see hands that have held lives together while helicopter rotors shook the ground. He sees someone small enough to break. Her locker on the 3rd floor holds one folded flag, triangular and perfect, from the Hindu Kush. The teammate who took the bullet meant for her. Ashley touches it once per shift, her hand steady, her breathing controlled, a ritual no one sees. The fluorescent lights flicker above the lockers. Rain hammers the roof somewhere distant. She closes the door and moves back into the unit with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Bed 7 admits a new patient at 0100 hours. Marcus Webb. Navy SEAL. Deaf from an IED blast in the Pand Valley 3 years ago. Chest tube placement from shrapnel wounds, sedated and breathing with mechanical assistance, alone in a hospital where nobody speaks his language in a way his body can understand. Ashley reads his chart and her jaw clenches once, imperceptibly, because Marcus Webb was the medic who replaced her in the unit after she rotated stateside. She knows his face from morning briefings. She knows his call sign. Knows his squad. Knows that he was carrying the same rifle she used to carry, doing the exact job she used to do, and now he's lying sedated with tubes in his chest because the mission doesn't stop and replacements don't get trained gently. The hospital's perpetual cold hits her left knee, the one with titanium pins from shrapnel that the official records say came from a vehicle accident in 2019. Her hands don't shake when she checks Marcus's vitals. 98.2 degrees core temp. Oxygen saturation holding at 94%. The chest tube draining clear serous fluid. She adjusts the ventilator settings with fingers that have performed emergency procedures in sandstorms and silence. Nobody notices her hands are moving like they remember something her mouth can never say. That's not acceptable charting. Dr. Mercer's voice cuts through the unit like a scalpel through silk. She doesn't turn around. She knows what's coming. Grand rounds. 0900 hours. The residents will gather in a semicircle like students and he will hold up her documentation from last week like it's evidence in a trial where she's already convicted. Diploma mill nurses who think field experience trumps proper medical education. His words will hang in the air while the residents nod and take notes and learn that competence without credentials is the same as incompetence. He wants them to know she's lesser. He wants her to know they know. Ashley finishes adjusting Marcus's settings and steps back. The monitor shows his heartbeat, steady and regular, a metronome of survival. She knows what he survived to get here. She knows what he's still surviving. She knows that this hospital has protocols for everything except understanding a patient who cannot hear. She documents the time, 0107 hours. Vital stable. Chest tube placement patent. Patient sedated, no acute distress noted. Her handwriting is perfect. Her observations are precise. Every word necessary. Every word defensible. Her jaw stays level. Her shoulders stay still. She will go to grand rounds in 8 hours and listen to Dr. Mercer tell a room full of younger doctors that her best work is barely adequate. The night shift continues. Rain starts falling outside, hammering the windows like applause for a performance nobody wanted to give. Ashley moves between beds, a patient in septic shock, a woman post-stroke, an elderly man with congestive heart failure, and her hands move like they're powered by something deeper than training. She checks lines. She reads monitors. She knows the precise moment when vital signs will crash before the machines announce it. A nurse's job is observation. A trauma surgeon's job is prediction. She does both and calls herself a nurse. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Dr. Mercer saw her composure and hated it. He'd spent 6 years in medical school and 5 years in residency and a decade in private practice, and he'd learned that the right way to hurt someone was through public humiliation. Through documentation. Through the institutional machinery that moves slowly but crushes completely. He'd learned that power comes from credentials. And when he looked at Ashley Cooper, standing silently at a bedside at 0200 hours, her chart meticulous, her interventions flawless, her present somehow both present and invisible, he saw someone who wasn't properly broken by the hierarchy. He saw someone who didn't flinch when he spoke. He saw someone he could make flinch. He started small. A question during rounds, asked in a way that made the answer seem stupid no matter what she said. Explain your rationale for the antibiotic selection. The literature suggests, and he would cut her off before she could finish. His mentor from Johns Hopkins had taught him that confidence comes from control. Control comes from making people doubt themselves. Make them doubt themselves enough and they disappear. They transfer. They quit. The problem solves itself. Ashley documented everything. Not because she was afraid, but because she was trained. Because in the Hindu Kush, documentation meant the next medic would know what the previous one had seen. Documentation saved lives. She wrote her notes and filed them perfectly and waited for the institutional machinery to do what it does. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at 0300 hours. Marcus Webb's monitor beeped steadily. Somewhere in the hospital, Dr. Mercer was sleeping in the on-call room, planning tomorrow's grand rounds, thinking about which of her notes to hold up first. And Ashley Cooper sat in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago, staring at her reflection in the window, watching the rain, knowing that what happened next was inevitable. She'd given up the open life 8 months ago for this. For Seattle General. For the night shift. For the invisible work that nobody recognizes. For the chance to watch a Navy SEAL named Marcus Webb survive. And she would watch him survive. No matter what Dr. Mercer said during grand rounds. No matter how many times he held up her charting and used it as a lesson in inadequacy. The institutional machinery was built to move slow. And she had already survived things that moved fast. The vending machine on the 3rd floor hummed its mechanical rhythm, a sound like a refrigerator built for someone's forgotten lunch money. Ashley fed coins into the slot, listening to the metallic clink and tumble of her selection dropping into the retrieval bin. Black coffee. Nothing else. Just the kind that tasted like iron and honesty, the kind that didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. 3 feet away, Dr. Mercer stood with an intern, his voice carrying the particular volume of a man performing for an audience. Some people mistake stubbornness for skill, he said, gesturing with his pen like a conductor. They think showing up is the same as being qualified. They coast on the fact that nobody wants to do night shift, so hospitals tolerate mediocrity just to fill the schedule. His laugh was thin, practiced, the sound of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in any room he paid attention to. Ashley retrieved her coffee. The cup was still warm from the machine's heating coil. She didn't look at Dr. Mercer. Didn't acknowledge the intern's uncomfortable shuffle. She simply turned and walked past both of them, her badge swaying against her scrubs in a steady rhythm, the only movement in her entire body that betrayed any motion at all. Her jaw tightened, molars pressing together hard enough to ache, but her expression remained carved from stone, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived things that would have broken ordinary people. The intern watched her go. Dr. Mercer didn't. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 weeks later, during medication review rounds, Ashley stood at the bedside of Marcus Webb, the deaf Navy SEAL in Bed 7, the one whose chart read like a catalogue of trauma from places most people would never find on a map. His wounds had begun their slow progression toward either healing or catastrophe, and the medications that moved him down the right path had to be calibrated with precision. Dr. Mercer had written an order for a dosage that exceeded the recommended range for Marcus's weight and renal function, a detail that should have been automatically caught by pharmacy, but the pharmacy tech had been new, distracted, human. Ashley pointed to the screen. "Doctor, this exceeds the recommended range for his weight and renal function." Her voice was flat, neutral, the kind of tone that makes no demands and expects none in return. Just information. Data. The way a nurse should speak to a doctor. Dr. Mercer's face flushed red, a transformation so complete it seemed to happen all at once. "Are you practicing medicine without a license, clipboard?" His voice had sharpened now, losing the performative quality and developing teeth. "Because I can call security right now and have you escorted out for insubordination. I can have your badge pulled before your shift ends. Is that what you want?" The room had gone very quiet. 2 residents froze mid-note. A nursing student looked at her shoes. "No, doctor," Ashley said. "Just clarifying." She updated the chart per his orders, because he was the attending, because challenging him further would confirm whatever narrative he was building, because there were protocols and hierarchies that existed for reasons both good and terrible. She documented the change, her handwriting neat and precise, the kind of notation that would hold up in any review, any hearing, any conversation with a hospital administrator down the line. Then she finished her shift 2 hours later and drove to the parking garage. 11 minutes. That's how long she sat in her car before turning the key in the ignition. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, hands that had held tourniquets tight on bleeding soldiers, that had performed open cardiac massage on a 13-year-old girl in a tent in Kandahar, that had the muscle memory of 17 years of training coded into their fiber. Those hands didn't shake. They didn't tremble. But the restraint required to keep them still was the kind of thing that accumulated, pressure building, like a weather system moving across mountains, inevitable in its direction. She breathed in counts of 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The kind of breathing that separates action from reaction, choice from impulse. Then she drove home through rain that hammered the asphalt like applause for a performance nobody was enjoying. The next morning, she returned to work for the night shift. Her uniform was clean, pressed, identical to the 12 others she owned. Her hair was fastened in the same regulation bun. Her badge hung at the same angle. Nothing about her suggested she had spent the previous 24 hours processing a decision that would reorganize the rest of her life, the choice to stay, to maintain cover, to continue being the thing Dr. Mercer believed she was, a competent night shift nurse without the credentials to be anything more. The institutional machinery of Seattle General had been built to move slow, designed by committees and lawyers and people who understood that hospitals needed protection from the chaos of human suffering. And the institutional machinery had decided, through the careful documentation that Dr. Mercer had begun assembling, that Ashley Cooper was exactly the kind of problem that moved slowly toward a predictable solution. In his office on the morning of her 3rd week of being called clipboard, Dr. Mercer dictated his observations into a voice memo that would later appear in her personnel file, pattern of overstepping scope of practice. Inappropriate medication questioning. Behavior inconsistent with professional humility. Recommend documentation and monitoring. He spoke the words the way a surgeon might discuss a tumor, clinical, dispassionate, the tone of a man who had already made the diagnosis and was now just following protocol. The documentation multiplied. Every medication question she asked became an incident report. Every time she spoke directly to a physician without approaching through the nursing hierarchy, it was noted. Every shift she worked past her scheduled time, not overtime, just staying late to ensure patient continuity, became an annotation in his growing file, performance above level of certification. Potential liability due to scope violation. Hospital Protocol 14J was Ashley's new opponent. It was a rule designed to protect patients, designed to preserve clear lines of authority in environments where confusion could kill. It was a good rule. And in Dr. Mercer's hands, it had become a weapon with surgical precision. Ashley charted her work with meticulous attention. She documented every medication question she asked and every response she received. She noted times and dates. She kept her handwriting consistent and professional. She did everything exactly right, which meant she did everything exactly according to the rules Dr. Mercer was systematically using to build a case for her removal. What they didn't know was that at 01:45 on a Thursday morning, those rules would no longer matter. Protocol 14J would become a suggestion. Hospital procedure would become a conversation between two people who understood that some commitments transcend the institutions that employ us. And the quiet night shift nurse with steady hands would become someone entirely different. But first, there was the waiting. There was Marcus Webb in bed 7, his vital signs still stable but trending wrong, the kind of deterioration that announces itself to people trained to listen. There was the flag folded into a perfect triangle in her locker on the basement level, the one that had draped the casket of the teammate who died because help arrived for minutes too late. There was the knowledge, coded into her DNA across 17 years of training and 3 combat tours, that some people require your willingness to break every rule that was ever written. And there was the sound, distant at first, but coming closer, of a patient alarm that would begin to scream. The monitor alarm started at 01:57 hours. A soft chirp at first, the kind that blended into the background noise of the ICU, ventilator rhythms, pump beeping, the fluorescent lights buzzing their constant electric hum. Ashley's head lifted before her eyes opened. That was the first gift 17 years of combat medicine had given her, the ability to sort relevant sounds from noise in her sleep. The chirp came again. Pressure alarm. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, her bare feet silent on the cold tile floor of the break room. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, beige walls, numbered doors, the smell of antiseptic layered over something older, something organic and worn. Bed 7. Marcus Webb was already starting to slip. His chest tube output had decreased from the steady amber stream it had maintained since surgery to something thicker, darker. Clotting. Internal pressure building. The hiss of the ventilator continued its rhythm, indifferent, while the monitor displayed vitals that were moving in the wrong direction. She didn't need to check the chart to know what had happened. The kinked tubing was visible now, a twisted section beneath the gauze dressing, not obvious unless you were looking for it, unless you knew what catastrophic pressure buildup looked like in a human chest. In the Hindu Kush, she'd seen this exact presentation 3 times. Twice they'd caught it in time. Once they hadn't. The medevac had taken 42 minutes, and by the time the bird landed at Kandahar, the patient had already become a body. Marcus's eyes were closed. Sedated. He didn't know his own chest tube was killing him. He didn't know that pressure was accumulating around his heart, crushing it with the slow, methodical precision of a machine. 83 kilograms of Navy SEAL, unconscious, trusting the machines and the people standing around him to notice what was happening. Ashley reached for the phone. Her hand was steady. She'd trained herself for decades to keep her hand steady, steady during amputations, steady during field resuscitations, steady while performing triage on Marines whose names she would later learn had been added to memorial plaques. Steady now, at 01:59 hours, while dialing 0 for operator and requesting Dr. Mercer's immediate presence in ICU, bed 7, chest tube occlusion, patient deteriorating. The operator repeated it back. The message would go to his phone, his beeper, the overhead system. 3 minutes later, when there was no response, Ashley paged again. The same message. The same clinical tone. Chest tube occluded. Patient deteriorating. Mercer, respond immediately. Her composure was like glass, clear, unbreakable, reflecting nothing. But beneath it, something older was beginning to move. Something that recognized the shape of this situation. Something that had been trained by the United States Navy to understand that institutional delays kill people, that paperwork moves slower than blood loss, that the distance between a protocol and a corpse is often just the amount of time it takes for someone to prioritize procedure over breath. Marcus's pressure was 98/60 seconds at 0203. The monitor displayed it in cold green numbers. 94 at 0205. The oxygen saturation that should have been 99 on maximum supplementation was drifting downward, 95, 93, 90, because his lungs couldn't exchange gas properly when his chest was filling with backed-up fluid. Third page at 0206. Ashley's voice remained level. Dr. Mercer, ICU, bed 7. Chest tube occlusion, patient unresponsive to clinical intervention, immediate physician presence required. The intercom crackled. Somewhere in this hospital, in his call room or on a bathroom break or reviewing charts, a man who had spent 8 months constructing her destruction heard that message. He would understand that Marcus Webb was a Navy SEAL. He would understand that the Navy does not forget its own, that paperwork trails lead somewhere, that failures of duty generate investigations. He would also understand that this was his opportunity. Dr. Mercer arrived at 0223. 23 minutes after the first page. 17 after the second. 8 after the third. Long enough for Marcus's pressure to drop to 82/48, long enough for his lips to take on the faint blue tinge of a man not getting enough oxygen, long enough for the situation to deteriorate from medical crisis to surgical emergency. He didn't come alone. He came with a leather portfolio, the kind that held incident reports and liability documents, the kind that smelled like bureaucracy and self-preservation. The portfolio hit the counter with the weight of judgment already rendered. Before we proceed, Dr. Mercer said, and his voice carried the precision of a man reading from a prepared script, I need you to understand Hospital Protocol 14J, which explicitly prohibits nursing staff from performing invasive procedures without direct physician supervision and documented authorization. He opened the portfolio to reveal forms, already filled out in meticulous handwriting. Ashley's name at the top. Sections highlighted. Pattern. Overstepping. Scope. Practice. The words arranged like charges in an indictment. Doctor, Ashley said, and her voice didn't crack, didn't stammer, carried no trace of the urgency burning through her like a pilot light, his chest tube is occluded. He needs immediate intervention. What he needs, Mercer said, flipping through the chart with the deliberate slowness of a man making a point, is proper documentation and risk assessment. I'm not ending my career because a nurse with a hero complex couldn't follow procedure. He pulled out a pen. Began making notes. His handwriting was small, precise, the handwriting of a man building a record. The monitor showed 85/58. The blue tinge on Marcus's lips was deepening. This close, Ashley could see the subtle signs, the slight flaring of his nostrils as his body tried to compensate for inadequate oxygen, the way his chest wall wasn't moving with the rhythm the ventilator was trying to impose, the microscopic tremor in his hands that came from cellular hypoxia beginning to cascade. His oxygen saturation is 87, Ashley said. Each word was measured, controlled, the speech pattern of someone stating facts rather than begging. His pressure is dropping. His output is 0. That tube is completely occluded. Then we document it. Mercer was still writing. The pen moved across paper. Incident report. Scope violation. Concern regarding nurse judgment. We follow protocol. We get an emergency surgery consultation. We don't just have you, he looked up, and his eyes were glass, make it up as you go along. The mission briefing echoed in her head. Office of Naval Intelligence. 18 months of embedded observation. 18 months of watching for a diversion ring moving synthetic opioids out of the pharmacy through falsified counts. 18 months of photographs and documentation and building a case that would hold in federal court. She was 20 days from having enough evidence. 20 days from rolling up 12 pharmacy technicians and 2 anesthesiologists moving $4.7 million in unaccounted fentanyl. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her cover was supposed to be perfect. She wasn't supposed to know the patient. Wasn't supposed to recognize the medic who'd held the line after she rotated out, who'd carried the same weight she'd carried, who was now unconscious with a kinked tube and a doctor more interested in protecting his liability than protecting a life. "I'm calling surgery," Mercer said, reaching for the phone. At 0214, the monitor changed its rhythm. The beeping that had been irregular, urgent, became a single sustained tone. A flat line. Not a metaphor. Not a dramatic moment in a television show. An actual human heart stopping, an actual cascade of cellular death beginning to accelerate through actual neural tissue and myocardial tissue and the 100 billion cells that made Marcus Webb a thinking, feeling, breathing human being. The sound was like a switch flipping. Like a door closing. Like the moment between alive and not. Dr. Mercer reached for his phone to call the ethics board. To start the paperwork for a failure to rescue investigation. To begin documenting his response to crisis. Ashley reached for her bag. Her hands moved on their own. The kind of movement that comes from deeper than conscious decision, from somewhere that lives below choice and preference and career considerations. From somewhere that remembers a medic dragging wounded Marines out of fire. From somewhere that carries 17 years of training and 3 combat tours and the weight of every person who trusted her with their life. The decision was already made before her conscious mind caught up. Before she could calculate the cost. Before she could weigh 18 months of investigation against 8 minutes of hypoxia. Before the rational part of her brain could remind her that she was supposed to maintain cover, follow protocol, document everything for the federal prosecutors who were waiting for her data. She was already moving. The fluorescent lights buzzed their electric hum. The monitor continued its flatline wail. Mercer was still talking about protocol and documentation and risk assessment. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the moment when Ashley understood, with absolute clarity, that the institutional failures around her had just become irrelevant. The hospital could write all the incident reports it wanted. The Navy would do what it did. But in the next 60 seconds, she was going to break every rule that was ever written, and the 17 years of cover she'd maintained were about to dissolve like breath on glass. The combat knife came from her bag in one fluid motion, carbon steel with a worn grip, the handle groove still holding Hindu Kush dirt she'd never fully cleaned because scrubbing it away felt like forgetting. Muscle memory took over. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She said it quietly, the way you give orders when shells are landing. "Step back, doctor." Mercer's eyes widened. He didn't move fast enough. Ashley was already cutting through Marcus's gown, one stroke, efficient, revealing his chest wall. Her left hand found the ribs without counting, the way a musician finds keys in the dark. 4th intercostal space. 5th rib. She didn't need the anatomy textbook, she had the muscle memory of field hospitals where mortar rounds walked across the compound and you learned to work by feel because the lights went out and you couldn't afford to hesitate. The blade went in at the exact angle they'd taught her in combat medicine school, angling slightly upward to avoid the neurovascular bundle, finding the pleural space like she'd done it yesterday instead of 8 years ago. Air hissed out under pressure, the sound of a lung reinflating, of physics and physiology aligning, of a human body remembering how to breathe. She reached in with her bare hand. No gloves. No time. Skin and blood and the feeling of a heart that had stopped, still and flaccid and useless. She found it in the darkness of the thoracic cavity, compressed it manually, rhythmically, counting compressions aloud while Dr. Mercer stood frozen against the wall like his neurons had stopped firing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice was a metronome. The monitor was a flat line. Then it wasn't. Then it was a flutter. Then a beat. Then a rhythm climbing, 95-60 seconds. 102-68. 110-72. Marcus Webb's heart, restarting under her hands the way it had restarted 100 times in the dust and chaos of Kandahar when she was someone else, someone the world was allowed to know about. 30 seconds. That's all it took to change everything. She withdrew her hand, packed the incision with sterile gauze from the crash cart, her movements precise and clean despite the blood coating her forearms to the elbows. The surgical resident who'd been standing frozen in the corner finally moved, finally understood that the patient wasn't dead anymore, and started running. Ashley paged the surgical team with a code that actually got them running, and within 40 minutes Marcus Webb was stable in post-op with a chest tube that actually worked, his color returning, his oxygen saturation holding at 97, his life preserved by a decision that was about to cost her everything. Within 60 minutes, hospital security arrived at her station. Dr. Mercer was behind them, his face arranged into an expression of regret so practiced it could have been carved from marble. The security officers, both of them looking deeply uncomfortable, asked her to surrender her badge and her key card. Their radios crackled with the ambient noise of a hospital that didn't yet know what was about to happen to her. She handed them over without argument, watching the badge disappear into a plastic evidence bag like it was a weapon that had been used in a crime. Mercer spoke while she was still watching it seal. Security footage is already archived. Your incident reports are filed with the medical board. I've copied my mentor at Johns Hopkins. He trained a significant portion of this hospital's surgical staff, and he's reviewed your actions as a case study in dangerous scope creep. He pulled out his tablet, swiped to an email chain that was already 17 messages deep. 15 distinct policy violations. Performing surgery without physician authorization. Operating without licensure in that capacity. Reckless endangerment. Assault with a weapon on hospital grounds. The last one made her turn to look at him. Her eyes were flat. Empty. She said nothing. You saved his life, Mercer continued, and there was something almost triumphant in his voice, the tone of someone who'd won not because he'd done his job well but because she'd finally given him something real to hang her with. I'm not disputing that. But you did it by breaking every protocol we have. You did it by being insubordinate, by overstepping, by acting like a cowboy instead of a professional. And in a hospital, Captain, he said the word like it was a joke, like rank meant nothing here, like her history was irrelevant because she was standing in his building where his rules were the only ones that mattered. We follow procedures. We chain of command. We don't pull knives out of our bags and perform emergency surgery because we think we know better than the system. The room went dead silent. Ashley didn't respond. She didn't tell him that the system had failed. That 5 doctors across 2 shifts had refused to take Marcus Webb's case because deaf people were lawsuit risks, because his benefits would never cover the complications, because they were afraid of the optics more than they cared about the life. That Dr. Mercer himself had arrived with incident reports already filled out, with her termination pre-written, with his career trajectory already calculated to survive what she'd just done. That the system hadn't lost tonight, the system had lost the moment Marcus Webb coded and Mercer chose documentation over intervention. She just looked at him. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. At 0300, Ashley sat in an empty diner on Capitol Boulevard, the kind of place that stayed open for insomniacs and hospital workers and people who had nowhere else to be. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the sound like they were singing to themselves about loneliness. Her coffee had gone cold in a white ceramic cup, a grey film forming on its surface. She was staring at her reflection in the window, just a tired woman in blood-stained scrubs with rust-colored stains under her fingernails, her face pale under the harsh light, looking like someone who'd stopped believing she had a future about 40 minutes ago. The ONI cover was burned. 2 years of investigation into the opioid diversion ring, 12 suspects identified but not yet arrested, all of it compromised because she'd chosen a life over a mission. She'd known the stakes when she went under. She'd signed paperwork understanding that exposure meant the investigation collapsed, that suspects walked free, that interdiction operations downstream from Seattle would never materialize. The Office of Naval Intelligence was going to receive notification that their operative was burned, that the asset they'd placed inside Seattle General's Pharmacy Oversight Committee had been blown wide open by a field thoracotomy that shouldn't have happened, that the lieutenant who'd been feeding her pharmaceutical shipping manifests for 18 months would disappear into whatever version of the witness protection program the military actually used. She wondered if Marcus Webb would remember her face when he woke up. She wondered if his deaf ears had somehow heard something in the tone of her voice, some register below normal hearing that marked her as military. She wondered if saving one life meant she'd failed to save however many would die when a 2-year investigation collapsed. She raised the cup to her lips. It was cold enough to hurt her teeth. A waitress who'd served her the same cup an hour ago refilled it without asking, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen this before. People in scrubs, people in uniforms, people who worked at the hospital up the street and came here when they couldn't go home yet. The coffee was hot against the rim. Steam rose up and fogged her glasses. "Rough night?" the waitress asked, the question automatic, the kind of comment you make to fill space. Ashley didn't answer. She just stared into the black water and watched her reflection disappear under the rising heat. She was thinking about the flag folded in her locker at home, the one that belonged to the teammate who died in the same medevac that had taken shrapnel and started the whole chain of events that put Marcus Webb in her hospital, in her unit, under her hands. She was thinking about the fact that she'd never opened that locker, never taken the flag out and looked at it in daylight, kept it in the dark the way you keep things you're not sure how to grieve. And she was thinking about the fact that in approximately 6 hours, when ONI was notified of her exposure, when the Philadelphia field office called the Seattle office, when someone with authority realized that the investigation was compromised, they were going to have questions. Hard questions. The kind of questions that didn't have good answers. Questions about why she'd blown her cover for a single patient, why she'd chosen to save a life instead of an operation, why she'd let emotion compromise her judgment. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she already knew the answer. It had nothing to do with judgment. It had to do with the fact that she'd spent 16 years learning not to be Ashley Cooper the person and 7 years more learning not to be Captain Cooper the combat medic, and she'd succeeded so completely at being invisible that when someone she actually knew, someone from her actual life, someone whose name she remembered from manifests and briefings, had flatlined in front of her, she'd forgotten that the mission was supposed to matter more than the man. She'd forgotten, for exactly 60 seconds, that she wasn't allowed to be a hero anymore. Jackson pushed through the hospital doors at 0900 with the shadow box held level in both hands, moving with the kind of purposeful rage only a 16-year-old can summon when protecting something sacred. The HR director stepped into his path, a woman named Patricia with a clipboard and the deflecting smile of someone trained to de-escalate, but Jackson didn't slow down. He walked around her like she was a piece of furniture. The morning light caught the glass front of the shadow box, and inside, medals hung in neat rows against midnight blue velvet, ribbons in colors that meant specific things to specific people, each one representing something Patricia would never understand. Jackson's hands were shaking, but not from fear. From restraint. He'd watched his mother absorb insults the way battlefield surgeons absorb blood, as an operational reality, something to account for but not something that broke your concentration. He was done being quiet about it. The shadow box was 3 feet wide and 18 inches tall, the kind of thing military families kept on mantles or locked in closets, a visual record of choices made in places most people couldn't find on a map. Jackson's mother had kept it hidden in the basement under old uniforms she thought he'd never see. He'd found it when he was 14, standing in the darkness behind the water heater, reading the typed citations mounted beneath each medal and understanding for the first time that his mother wasn't just a nurse. She was someone who'd been someone else first. Someone important. Someone brave. And she'd given that up to be the person who made his breakfast and helped with calculus homework and never, ever made him feel like her service was bigger than his existence. He walked toward bed 7 without hesitation, the nurses parting like water around a stone. Marcus Webb lay propped on pillows with his tracheostomy tube still bandaged, his eyes tracking movement with the constant awareness of someone deaf in a world of sound. When he saw the shadow box, something shifted in his face. Recognition. Memory. The kind of look that comes when two people who've seen the same terrible things find each other across distance. Jackson set the shadow box down on the bedside table with deliberate care and stepped back. He didn't speak. His hands shook as he pointed to the citations typed on official Navy paper, each one mounted with the precision of an honor guard folding a flag. Marcus's breath came shallow through his tracheostomy. His lips moved, and the words came out as a rasp, the sound of someone learning to speak without hearing himself, each syllable requiring conscious effort. Viper 6. That's Viper 6. The recognition hit like percussion, a name spoken aloud in a hospital hallway that changed the entire architecture of the moment. Viper 6. The call sign Ashley Cooper had earned running medevac operations in Kandahar, the designation that meant she could navigate to landing zones in sandstorms, that meant her judgment about who lived and who died had been trusted by teams that lived or died based on that judgment. Marcus knew that name. He'd flown on helicopters piloted by Viper 6. He'd watched her work in conditions where the margin between competence and catastrophe was measured in seconds. A Marine lieutenant colonel was visiting his grandson 3 beds over, a man still wearing his dress uniform despite being 2 months retired, the kind of officer who wore service like other men wore cologne. It just came off him. He heard the call sign and his shoulders straightened. He heard it and walked toward the nurse's station without question, his boots hitting the floor with the rhythm of someone who'd walked on parade grounds in formations of thousands. His eyes moved to Jackson, then to the shadow box, and something about the moment contracted into absolute focus. He reached for the citation, his reading glasses still hanging from the chain he'd refused to remove when he hung up his uniform. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of someone reading the words aloud not just for information but for record. Captain Ashley Cooper, for extraordinary heroism under fire in Kandahar, March 2019. He paused. The hallway had gone quiet in that way hospitals get quiet when something true is being spoken. Silver Star. The Marine Lieutenant Colonel's eyes moved down the citation. Bronze Star with Valor device. Another pause. Purple Heart. His voice didn't waver. The words landed like precision strikes. And Navy Cross Commendation. Jackson's hands had stopped shaking. Marcus Webb was crying now, tears running down his face while the ventilator breathed for him, the machines registering his vital signs while the visible reality of him, the man himself, was processing something that had been hidden right here in front of everyone for 8 months. The elevator doors opened at the north corridor, and a 2-star general stepped out in dress blue so crisp the fabric looked like it could cut paper. He was here for a classified briefing in the administrative wing, 3 floors down, but his timing was the kind that only happens in moments where the universe decides to accelerate. He walked into the gathering crowd with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change, and when he saw Ashley Cooper standing in her scrubs with Jackson and Marcus Webb and the Marine Lieutenant Colonel holding her citations in trembling hands, he did something that would appear in 3 different social media videos before noon. He rendered a salute. Not a casual gesture but a formal, geometric salute, forearm at precise right angle, held until the count of 3, and his eyes were fixed on her decorations rather than her face, acknowledging the rank that the scrubs were hiding. When he lowered his hand, the hallway had turned into something that resembled a military formation. Dr. Mercer appeared from the direction of the nurse's station at that exact moment, moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the authority in every room, and watched a 2-star general stand at attention for the night shift ICU nurse he'd documented for insubordination. Watched Marcus Webb sign something in ASL that made Jackson smile. Watched the Marine Lieutenant Colonel read the next citation aloud, Bronze Star, 2nd Award, for actions in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, Helmand Province. The room had become a courtroom, and Dr. Mercer was no longer the judge. He stood motionless while the general released his salute and extended his hand to Ashley, grasping her hand like she was his equal, like the scrubs meant nothing, like there were no protocols separating them. 3 hours later, at 1,200 hours, a Pentagon liaison walked into Seattle General carrying a folder stamped eyes only, and everything that followed moved at the speed of institutional crisis management. The liaison found Ashley in the ICU. She'd never left, she had nowhere else to go, and the security of habit had kept her moving through her shift even with her badge confiscated and her termination papers signed, and they spoke in the corner by the supply cabinet for 6 minutes. That was all it took. The liaison confirmed what her ONI handler already knew, that Captain Ashley Cooper had been operating undercover designation Nightingale Actual, embedded as a civilian nurse to monitor suspected opioid diversion within the hospital's pharmacy department, and that her actions in saving Marcus Webb's life, while technically a protocol violation, had also preserved a surveillance operation that had been running for 22 months. The operation had generated enough evidence of pharmaceutical theft, falsified records, and criminal distribution to support federal charges against Dr. Brandon Hayes, the hospital's pharmacy director, Dr. Robert Sterling, a cardiologist with $1.2 million in offshore accounts, and 9 other hospital staff members involved in moving controlled substances to street distribution networks. 12 arrests. Federal charges. Conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The mission had succeeded. Captain Cooper had just destroyed her cover to save the right person, and the right person had turned out to be both a Navy SEAL and the linchpin that kept the entire investigation intact. Dr. Mercer's former mentor received the video at 10:47 that same morning, forwarded by his daughter with the message, "Dad, isn't this the guy you recommended to Seattle General?" Dr. Richard Caldwell, Chairman Emeritus of Johns Hopkins Internal Medicine, sat at his desk in a room lined with faculty photographs and watched his protege screaming at a woman in scrubs while a Navy SEAL watched from his bed and a decorated officer stood at attention in the background. Caldwell had trained Mercer, had written his recommendation letters, had attended his wedding and held his child after birth and told him he was destined for greatness. Watched him for nearly 2 decades and learned that medical skill without character was a weapon aimed at the wrong target. Caldwell's hands were steady when he called the Seattle General Board at 1400. His voice was the temperature of deep water. "I taught Richard Mercer that medicine requires more than competence," he said. "If this video represents what I taught him, then I failed. I am formally requesting his immediate removal from staff and a comprehensive ethics review." The request from a man of Caldwell's stature, within hours of the video generating 2.3 million views, was catastrophic. The hospital board, already hemorrhaging credibility from the opioid ring investigation, suspended Dr. Mercer pending investigation by 1630. The investigation took 3 weeks and revealed a pattern: 18 complaints from nursing staff over 3 years, all dismissed. 2 nurses denied career advancement because they'd challenged his authority. 3 uninsured patients who'd received delayed treatment because Mercer wanted to minimize liability exposure. By month 6, the state medical board had reviewed his credentials and issued a formal sanction. Not permanent revocation, just enough to make him untouchable. Seattle General terminated him on a Wednesday in month 4. No other hospital system would hire him during the review. His wife filed for separation at month 5, citing financial instability and public humiliation. His salary, which had been $380,000 annually, became $0. He found work teaching CPR at Raleigh Community College for $18 an hour, demonstrating chest compressions on a plastic dummy to 19-year-olds who didn't know who he used to be, who scrolled their phones while he explained hand placement, who had no idea that the woman who destroyed his career had done it by saving the life of a man he'd decided wasn't worth the paperwork. Ashley Cooper stood in her Navy dress white 6 months later at the Washington Navy Yard, the jacket tailored to accommodate medals on her chest, her son Jackson beside her growing out of his suit. Marcus Webb received the Navy Cross, the full one, not a commendation, and when the Secretary of the Navy presented it, Marcus turned and saluted Ashley instead. She returned it, her hand moving with the precision of 16 years of practice, and Marcus handed her a flag. The same one. The folded triangle of fabric that had belonged to Corpsman First Class David Chen, the teammate who'd taken shrapnel so Marcus and Ashley could reach extraction. She'd folded it with bloody hands once. Now she held it in both hands in the October sun, understanding that the mission was over, understanding that she didn't have to be invisible anymore. "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most," she said when a young Navy nurse approached and asked how she'd found the courage. She meant it. She'd held the line this long. Now it was time to let others hold it with her. If you've ever watched someone carry an impossible weight with perfect composure, if you've ever wondered what true strength looks like when it's standing right in front of you, subscribe for the full story. Like this video. Comment below, would you have saved his life or protected your cover? The answer matters more than you think.